lecture. Johan, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pavel. It's a tremendous honor not only to speak here at this 40-year anniversary of such an important institute at IIASA, but also humbled by the fact of speaking in front of such an eloquent audience of co-scientists. And moreover, doing this in such a challenging setting, not only the beauty of the Rathaus, but also being between you, a wine of glass, and the food. So to keep you focused, I'll start by sharing with you a very personal testimony of a bizarre behavior that I have, which is almost as challenging as speaking here to you tonight. I've spent most of my life working with research with small-scale farmers in Africa, but I also have the privilege of every morning waking up to this site. This is my island in the Baltic, and I walk up very, very early in the morning, even this time of the year, naked, and walk down on the shore and take my, in Swedish, morning dip. That's a typical Scandinavian behavior. I can do that without shocking anyone because I'm normally all alone, apart from the fact that sometimes there's a Finland ferry passing by, but that's not so usual. But standing there and looking at this view, it reminds you of the beauty of planet Earth, but it also reminds you that the Earth system has this tremendous resilience, lulling us into a comfort zone, because science, of course, tells us a completely different story than this harmony. It tells us of a crowded planet. It tells us of a world which we can call a 369 trajectory, where we are more or less committed to 3 degrees warming, where we are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction of species, and where we're committed to no less than 9 billion people on planet Earth. This 369 world over the next 40 years is a transformative agenda for human being. It is a transformative agenda that is so serious that when we scientists talk about this, we normally address exactly what we have been talking and you've been talking about this morning, the fact that how do we communicate the dire truth of science? And I had this privilege just a month back to sit down and have a panel on the challenges facing humanity with the CEO of Nestlé, Paul Bulck. And he told me after my speech that, don't worry, Johan, my definition of a pessimist is a well-informed optimist. So this talk tonight will be the insights we require to support a transformation. And we all know that the planet is subject to 4 squeezes. It's the demographic pressure, not only of numbers of people, but also of affluence. It's a climate crisis interacting with an ecosystem crisis. And moreover, which one of the directors of IIASA, Buzz Holling, who's here tonight, has been pursuing for so many years, the insights that nature is not behaving as we stipulate it should. In fact, tipping points and nonlinear change, surprise is the universal rule of how our interactive, complex, self-regulating system works. We've entered the Anthropocene. There's so much scientific evidence today that science can speak with one voice to say that we become a geological force of change. We're pushing ourselves out of the Holocene, which has been the stable phase supporting human development so far. We're starting to see things happening much, much faster than even theory stipulated it should. This, I think, arguably is the most important observational line that exists on Earth today. And it's not the Dow Jones Index. It's not the fall of the bond prices in Greece. It is, as you are all aware, of course, the abrupt shift in summer ice extent in the Arctic. And the drama here, which is so well known in this hall, of course, is that 2007 saw a 30% loss over 2 months of Arctic summer ice. It could have been an outlier, but 2012 is another low point where we no longer can exclude that the Arctic has entered a death spiral. Now, if that's the case, as we are all aware, then suddenly a feedback kicks in, which is so dramatic, which is illustrated in the drama of 2012, which is that the entire surface of Greenland is now shifting color very fast because it's all at a melt point, which means that suddenly and surprisingly, it's no longer the US and China who are the major emitters and radiative forcing nations in the world. It's Denmark, because Greenland is changing albedo and creating an energy injection equivalent of the entire US energy consumption over 1 year. So suddenly we're seeing the Earth system, which has so far been a buffer, of our disturbances, seemingly moving into a trajectory from friend to foe. Science has communicated this in a very effective way, I would argue, in summaries, and I think the top of this iceberg of knowledge is really the Planet Under Pressure State of the Planet Declaration, which came out of the largest ever gathering of scientists in London in the run-up to the Rio+20 meeting earlier this year. But there's a number of scientific inputs here, from the Potsdam Nobel Symposium, which my friend and colleague John Schellenhuber is also with us here, kicked off in 2007. And I think it's the first time that science on the top here communicates something very dramatic to humanity. We have evidence to suggest we're reaching a saturation point. Humanity is hitting the ceiling of the ecological capacity of planet Earth to support the world as we know it, beyond which we can no longer exclude major invoices from the planet that may surprise and hit us in very unwanted ways. As Bob Watson points out in the Blue Planet report, which is one of those syntheses, our ability to do has vastly outstripped our ability to understand. And I think IIASA stands very much for the deeper understanding. But the interesting thing is that science is also saying that there's a window out there. There's a transformative chance of moving ourselves into a safe operating space. The evidence behind the Anthropocene, as we all know, is actually increasingly a very hard set of data. This is the way the curves look like on any parameter you may choose that matters from human well-being. Up until the mid-1950s, in fact, humanity had very limited impacts on the Earth system as a whole. You could argue that the conventional development model actually worked. It was worth undermining the Earth system because it paid back in impressive social human well-being. But we come to the mid-1950s, the great acceleration takes off, we put in high gear in our industrial metabolism. We're only 3 billion people, but off we go in the journey we all know so well. The warnings came early. In 1962, Rachel Carson writes her seminal book, Silent Spring, warning humanity early that we may be moving in a very dangerous direction. In 1972, the Club of Rome releases its Limits to Growth. In 1972, IIASA is up and running with the legendary director Howard, who is also here tonight, showing the way of systems analysis of the risks humanity is facing. They were all shot down, as you know, from conventional economists and policymakers. These were the kind of wolves shouting for some kind of neo-Malthusian future. But look at the graph. We could argue that humanity could be excused because these early foresightful warnings came without very much empirical base. We didn't know where we were heading. Today, we're up here. Today, we're standing on a tremendous mountain of observational evidence. We're the first generation to know that we need action. In fact, we're not only the first generation to know, we're the first generation that will still be alive to tell our children that when we were born, we were a small world on a big planet. Now, dear grandchildren, we are a very big world on a small planet. In our lifetime. This is a tremendous acceleration where nobody can claim that we've warned and warned and warned. This is synthesis coming out over the last 5-10 years. And we have evidence to suggest we need a rapid transition. It's starting to be understood by policy, as Jeff Sachs pointed out today. The Ban Ki-moon high-level report on global sustainability acknowledges the risk of tipping points and the need for a transformation. It says that the current development paradigm is not working. And the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, a global science network, is a tremendous opportunity for us to bridge a new social contract between science and society. Even media and business is starting to understand. This is the way we normally portray turbulence in the world, the Lehman Brothers vortex of sucking down in the financial crisis. But even The Economist welcomed humanity to the Anthropocene a year back. And we're starting to see social and ecological turbulence now playing out at the big regional scale. The Arab Spring increasingly is shown not to be caused only by a suppressed, socially connected, engaged, new young generation. Phosphorus prices hit the ceiling. Food prices hit the ceiling because of oil price increases, but also because of forest fires in Russia and exports stopped due to droughts in Australia. Social ecological turbulence at play. The Economist has this wonderful British understatement summary, how I feel science is increasingly feeling, which is, when reality changes faster than theory stipulates it should, a certain degree of nervousness is a reasonable response. I think this summarizes quite well where we are today. Things are changing faster than theory stipulates it should. We're starting to see interconnectedness. When tipping points occur and the risk, as Carlo Nobris, who's also with us here, indicates more and more that we cannot exclude a tipping point where the Amazon rainforest flips over to a savanna, this is a new drama. It's not changing linearly. When 50% of Borneo is losing its rainforest for palm oil, it's not only knocking down biodiversity and life support for human communities, it's interconnected with the Asian monsoon, and therefore interconnected with the Asian economy, and therefore hitting back on financial markets in the US and in Europe. So the tipping points are increasingly a social matter. We know increasingly that the tropical reefs in the world may be doomed by 2050 of the interactions between eutrophication, global warming, and overfishing. Now, this is not something just esoteric when systems like this flip over and get totally locked due to feedbacks of soft corals. This is the life support system for 300 million people living along coastal regions. It's a regulating system for the stability of the Earth system. So we're starting to see a situation where we have pressures, the Anthropocene, and tipping points which are interacting, which require a new thinking, a new science for global sustainability, where we're increasingly recognizing that this is critically important for humanity, that the Holocene state, the interglacial of the past 12,000 years with a stable polar region in the Arctic, a stable polar regions in the Antarctic, is an equilibrium, which is the only equilibrium we know that can support our modern world and the prosperity for 9 billion people. That was what led, as Pavel referred to the efforts of trying to offer a scientific concept which we call planetary boundaries, which builds on the great work of IIASA and all the colleagues which are represented here in the room, building up the knowledge on Earth system science, tipping points, guardrails, carrying capacities, and the interconnectedness of the Earth system. The beauty is that the world can today demand from science to define a quantitative, safe operating space within the big Earth system processes that regulate the stability of our modern economy. And that this is not only about climate change, that biodiversity, nutrients, water, land, air pollution, stratospheric ozone are part of this interactive stability. I just put this graph on the table that I find it very, very worrying that even on biodiversity, Anthony Barnowski and colleagues show that we cannot exclude a global tipping point which would undermine resilience and stability in our landscapes to support agriculture, fresh water, and stability for our economies. So we're indeed in a very non-linear, non-analog state. So to come to a closure here and take you closer to the food, I just want to challenge us to also start communicating in a new way. This new integrated science, which we all represent, can, I think, be communicated in a way that also puts not only the risks in place, but also the solutions. We've tried, for example, to experiment with a book that we call The Human Quest on a transformation to a safe operating space in the future by linking up with National Geographic photographer Matthias Klum to get a new way of communicating to business. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Peter Backer, Björn Stigson is here, has now engaged very deeply in a science journey to get science into the business models of this transformative agenda. So it's truly about reconnecting our societies with the biosphere. It's about recognizing that the Earth system provides the basis for our economy and prosperity, and it's clearly about a great transformation. Business as usual will not do the job. Even a business leader like Peter Backer, today leading the World Business Council, if he would stand here today, he's saying we're talking of a revolution. And the interesting thing is that we have so much evidence that we can succeed. Much of our research shows that crisis can be the window for opportunity. We see it in the management systems, the new management systems in the Australian Great Barrier Reef. We see it in a lot of the urban developments in the world, and we see it also in some of the agricultural transformations in Latin America, seeing crisis as an opportunity for change. The Global Energy Assessment that IIASA led and was recently launched, it's a thick volume, but it's full of solutions and the story of a possibility of a transition to a clean, renewable energy future which supplies secure energy for all in a world with 9 billion people. Similarly on agriculture, if we would be able to feed 9 billion people with sustainable intensification of agriculture without encroaching on biodiversity, we could solve so many of the climate, energy, eutrophication, pollution, and biodiversity challenges in the world. And a recent paper that we published in Nature with John Foley's shows that this can, in fact, be done. But we need to mobilize science in a new contact with society. Finally, If we have biophysical boundaries we need to respect at the planetary scale, providing a ceiling for human development, the civil society in the world and development community is clearly showing that there is probably a social floor we as scientists also need to recognize. So we need to address the equity dimension of how much water, how much biodiversity, how much atmospheric space does everyone on this planet have a right to in terms of securing a future. And if we recognize that ceiling and the floor, we suddenly don't have so much degrees of freedom, but it also creates a question of how we design a new economy to address this challenge. Suddenly a price on the market won't be enough. We need to thus think of local development in the world as being dependent on global sustainability. Even a local farming community outside of Ouagadougou requires a stable earth system for their own future. The economy needs to be built as a support for a biosphere and society which form the outer ring. Not as today in the other way around, where the economy is the goal and we try to reduce environmental impacts. Science is stepping up to this challenge, I would argue. The effort, for example, of launching Future Earth, which is an integration of the global environmental change program that so many of you are involved in, into one integrated research endeavor, not only on integrated science, but also integrated science for solutions in support of a transition. And what I find quite surprising, to really close this, is that just as we're looking at the beauty of this building and being in awe of what it represents in culture and knowledge, the same thing goes for the biosphere. I think we can argue today that with scientific evidence to say that sustaining the remaining beauty of the planet is a strategy for any finance minister. It's a strategy for our own prosperity in a future that will certainly be challenging, but also very, very exciting. And the excitement comes, of course, of doing exactly what these three persons are doing on this beach, walking the talk together. And I would really like to congratulate IIASA for having walked the talk for 40 years and hoping for another very prosperous 40 years to come. Probably the most exciting in the modern history of humanity on this wonderful planet of ours. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just remind you before we go to food. This morning we had a high-level panel, and you remember well, it was about communicating science, right? We were worried about, and we were just proposing big solutions. If you look at him, at my good friend here, do we really need more than a couple of more of these excellent scientists talking the way he talks? Thank you very much. One more applause. And now, on behalf of our host, I think the food bar is open, right?